protecting the right to an abortion, protecting transgender kids, protecting Social Security. If they take an advanced position on these and don't go into the usual Democratic, defensive crouch, he can be beaten. And we know that Trump can be beaten. So he's not invincible by any matter. Like Hillary Clinton beat him in the popular vote. Joe Biden beat him in the popular vote electoral college. He lost the midterms. He's got the stink of loser on him, but just don't think that he can't win again.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Aaron Rupar Show. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Oliver Willis. If you're following me on social media, you're probably also following Oliver. He's one of the most legendary progressive bloggers. He has been at this for over 20 years now, I think, dating back to the early days of the George W. Bush administration. So he has a lot of context, a lot of experience covering media, blogging about progressive politics, watching Fox News. And I think as you watch and listen to our conversation, that will come through how he is an authority on this modern era of American politics. Oliver and I go deep on Biden's messaging and how we can improve it heading into the 2024 election cycle. We talk quite a bit about news that broke this week about CNN having a town hall event with Trump next week. CNN has been under heavy criticism for this, and we talk about that, and Oliver explains why he thinks CNN's decision to have this event is actually a sign of the network's desperation for ratings, and why he thinks this will end up backfiring on CNN. And we also talk about the focus of his newest newsletter. He has a Substack called Oliver Willis Explains that I highly recommend you subscribe to if you haven't already. His latest newsletter gets into this very bizarre story about Trump having a physical altercation on a plane with a reporter who was covering him, and this story not emerging for 37 days until it was included this week in a Vanity Fair report, despite the fact that numerous reporters were on this plane and witnessed this. And Oliver details to me why he thinks this is a reflection of the toxic and symbiotic relationship that Trump has with mainstream reporters. Next week's episode of the show will feature Brian Klaas. Brian is a political scientist based out of the UK, but he's an American. He's actually from Minnesota, like I am, and he is an expert on authoritarianism. And so we'll talk about the authoritarian threat to American democracy, heading into the midterms next week. I think that'll be a good conversation. So tune in for that. That episode, like all episodes of the podcast these days, will drop next Thursday morning. If you're not already subscribed to the show, please do so wherever you get your podcasts. That really helps me. And if you're watching the footage, or if you do want to watch the footage, be sure to check out my YouTube page and please subscribe and like this episode as well, because it helps spread the word about the show. Without further ado, let's get to my interview with Oliver. Welcome, everyone, to the Aaron Rupar Show. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Oliver Willis. Oliver is one of the most legendary progressive bloggers out there, I would say. He's been at this for over 20 years now, and was actually, I think, one of the very first people that I followed on Twitter. I remember... I started on Twitter, I think it was April of 2011, and there's been a few occasions where I've had to kind of scroll back in my follower list over the years, and you're always like one of the very first people, because they rank them basically in reverse chronological. So the people that you follow first are like the last ones at the bottom of your list. And so, yeah, I can't remember if you were at that time retweeted into my feed or how that worked. Maybe I just had read something that you had written at that time. I guess you would have been at Media Matters probably back then.
Yeah, I was shooting out a lot of tweets back then, so even more than now. So God knows what it was.
Well, I think at that time already, like I said, I had just started, and I think you were already, up into the tens of thousands of followers. So you were kind of like a leading voice on the left on Twitter at that time. And so I feel like I've known you forever, even though we've really only talked twice. I did a Q&A with Oliver for Public Notice, my newsletter, about a year ago now, almost exactly, as it turns out. And we're talking today. We've obviously DM'd a bit over the years and things like that, but sure. It's great to have you on the show. So thanks for making some time to do it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, and I should probably also mention up top that Oliver does a Substack called Oliver Willis Explains, which I find to be a really useful resource for kind of the straight talk that he provides to Dems about political messaging, kind of breakdowns of the media, what's going on in cable news and elsewhere. And also, he had an interesting piece, just to mention one specifically, on beer being transgender now, with the whole Dylan Mulvaney controversy, and kind of breaking down that really it's about money. It's not really about Anheuser-Busch or any other company going woke. It's all about kind of the dollars and cents. And so, if you're into that sort of insightful political commentary, definitely check out Oliver Willis Explains. And Oliver is also a senior writer at the American Independent. What do they have you covering there? It seems like you cover a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly cover Biden and Biden related stuff. I'm on the Biden beat, so not a lot of news, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I basically cover Biden and a little bit of everything else. Sometimes some media coverage, some stuff in Congress, but I'm mostly focused on Biden and everything directly related to the Biden administration. So it's kind of a pretty broad portfolio I've got.
Yeah. So I would imagine that's a lot of coverage of like Biden wins and like good stuff that he's doing. Or is it more kind of looking at, holding up a mirror to some of the coverage of him? Like what specifically, when you say you're on the Biden beat, what does that mean at the American Independent?
I mean, a lot of it is mostly covering the things that the administration is doing that they're not really great, in my opinion, at explaining to an audience in general, like what they're actually doing and what a big deal it is. Like there's a lot of these policies that they've put in place over the last 2 years at like agencies like EPA and doing a lot of green energy stuff and a lot of stuff on environmental justice and a lot of stuff on, just reforms that he's put in place since he's been in the presidency that I think sometimes gets lost in the sort of wonkish weeds. And even, they get in their own heads about this stuff in the administration a lot of the time. So what I try to do is try and translate, like, what does all this stuff actually mean for regular everyday people, and in a very clear way that maybe you don't see in the mainstream media that you will get from a progressive media outlet like the Independent, to just sort of say like, hey, this is a big deal, this is important, this is a change from how things have been done in the past under both directly comparing to Trump, but also comparing to past Democratic presidencies of all types. Like,
Yeah.
that's sort of what I cover with that. So it's sort of a wide variety of things, and also his interactions with Congress, which especially lately have been pretty explosive, and he's kind of been getting some wins there, so those are good to highlight as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do think that Biden has a bit of a struggle, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this, with getting earned media. Like I don't see a lot of, he does a lot of speeches these days, and he has leading into the midterm elections and kind of beyond that, but he kind of delivers the same speech over and over. And, he does have a couple bits, like the one where he would read from Rick Scott's plan to basically cut the social safety net. And those would always make for kind of good viral moments. As someone who watched a lot of these speeches that he would do, but he doesn't really go on TV very much for interviews. We can all think back on how Trump, day in and day out, every single event that Trump would do would have some sort of outrageous thing happening that would get a lot of coverage. And, maybe that's not necessarily the type of earned media that you want, but I do think that Biden and the Biden administration, they do have a little bit of trouble kind of breaking through and getting positive coverage for what they're doing, either because in some instances it's too wonky or they're just not really putting themselves out there. Curious for your thoughts on that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with it to a certain point. Like part of the, quote unquote problem is that he's so normal, right? Like we went through 4 years of an extremely abnormal and absurdist presidency. And so now Biden comes into office, and Biden does not have the sort of ability that, President Obama did, which is the sort of more dynamic media personality. Biden is sort of a lunch pail kind of guy, and that kind of comes through in his presidency. And sometimes I feel that ends up with, sort of a more wonkish approach to these sort of things. And they don't think that sometimes these issues warrant major media coverage, but they're actually a big deal and they need to get covered. And so, yeah, they don't know how to make them media worthy.
Yeah, because I mean, my newsletter today was largely about, and there's Cal making a cameo appearance. Cal, do you have any thoughts on Biden's messaging?
Not enough treats.
Not enough. Oh, okay, not enough treats to share them with us. But no, I mean, my newsletter today was largely about Biden's polling, and it's kind of a complicated topic because objectively his polling right now is really bad. It's compared to other presidents in the modern era, it's even worse than Trump's was at a comparable time in 2019, basically heading into the third year of his administration. And, on one hand, that isn't the end of the world because Biden's polling is still better than Trump's is right now. He's right there with DeSantis. So when you do kind of the realistic matchup of someone that he's going to have to beat in the presidential election, he's doing fine. I mean, you can also look back on the midterms last year. Biden's polling was pretty bad heading into that. But when Republicans are out there, trying to ban abortion and trying to cut the safety net, take away healthcare, as Biden likes to say, elections are not a comparison with the almighty. It's a choice with one other person. And so
Right.
You can look at it through that lens. But I also think, the type of coverage that you do, which, in some ways should be an extension of stuff that the White House should be trying to do, get it out there, how they're helping people, what they're doing in terms of policy. I think that would help if the White House is a little bit better at marketing itself and kind of getting the word out there about what Biden is doing.
Yeah, it's this matter of, how do you translate these things in sort of a media atmosphere that is not looking for these sort of things? They're not looking for the sort of wonky things. They're looking for the spectacular and the exciting. And like sometimes, things like repairing thousands of bridges across the country is not spectacular and exciting. Installing, electric car system, charging system across the entire interstate highway system is a gigantic, monumental achievement. And I think it's going to be, strangely, one of the giant legacies of the Biden administration. But how do you make that work for someone in their day-to-day lives that they're not directly affecting them, other than when they drive up to a charging station in their electric car, which most people don't have yet, which is another thing that like the administration has, passed tax credits so that people are more likely to buy electric cars. And so It's like, how do you connect these dots for people and also break through the media, interest in, bread and circuses at the same time that's, attracted to things like Donald Trump and even, stuff within the Democratic Party. Like you have people like, AOC on the Democratic side. Like it's a really hard thing to break through. But on the flip side of it, even though Biden's numbers may not be great, like one of the virtues and one of the reasons he is president is because he is sort of normal and quote unquote not exciting. Like that, I think the last election showed us that yes, there was an interest in 2016-ish for, Trump sort of shaking things up, quote unquote. But there's also a very real, almost silent majority, as they would speak about, that is interested in just having a normal guy that you don't pay attention to every day, that is not the lead story in the news. Like a lot of people sort of like the idea that the first story every day when they pull up the news is probably some celebrity nonsense and not what the president tweeted last night, about the Met Gala, for instance, like this past week. Like we just went through this big celebrity event, and we have the Writers Guild strike right now. We both know that like those are issues that Trump would not be able to shut up his mouth about, right?
Yeah.
And Biden is not going to talk about it unless maybe at the correspondence dinner he'll do a little throwaway joke, but it's not going to be the central focus of his day because he's not sitting there watching television all day like you and I, that are monitoring this for a living. He's not doing that because he's busy running the country. And I feel like that doesn't show up in polling a lot of the times, but I feel that actually the results of both recent elections kind of show that the people that support that, worldview are actually the majority of voters. And, luckily in the 2020 election, that was a majority of the voters in the states that, won the Electoral College is voters that they don't want the president to be an omnipresent celebrity in their life. Maybe if he's like a Barack Obama, but they definitely don't want a Trumpish version of this. And so that is Trump, but that is Biden's biggest strength, is contrasting himself with, do you want the crazy show over here, or do you want the, the boring grandpa who is, giving you, an electric charger? Like, I think most people are going to say, yeah, I just want the electric charger and the president to leave me alone. And so I think that doesn't show up in the numbers, but I think that is something that can show up on, election day. And it showed up last year during the midterm. You had a lot of these candidates that were basically Trump clones running around talking about, you had Carrie Lake and characters like this talking about, the election was stolen and rigged, and, attacking transgender kids and talking about QAnon conspiracies. And voters just sort of said, yeah, we want normal candidates. We want regular people representing us in the House and the Senate. The closest thing you had to a weird Democratic candidate was John Fetterman, who basically was like, yeah, I like all this normal, regular stuff. I just happen to be a really tall, big guy, but I like all the regular stuff you do, and I don't want to be Dr. Oz, which is another weirdo that they picked to run against him. And so I think there's this not quite silent majority, but there's a majority for normalcy that is very much in, Biden's favor coming up in the next election. And I think for the long term, actually, for Democrats. Sorry about that.
Well, let's hope so, because we know what the alternative is. And speaking of bread and circuses and crazy shows, I wanted to pick your brain on the big media news of the week, which is the announcement that CNN has made that they are next week hosting Trump for a town hall, and not just a town hall in New Hampshire, but one with Republican primary voters. And so you can kind of imagine how this is going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, New Hampshire in the U.S. Senate race last year, Republican primary voters nominated Don Bolduc, who was an election denier. And so the Republican Party there is very Trumpy. And so I'm assuming that the questions, to the extent that they are a representative sample of the New Hampshire Republican primary electorate, are going to be pretty far out there. Caitlin Collins, who, is a former Daily Caller writer, although, I think she's kind of distanced herself from that. She did some good work covering the Trump White House for CNN. So I at least want to give her that much credit that, I don't think that at this point she's really, like a Tucker Carlson clone or like a right winger in a sense that, you'd see on Fox News or Newsmax or something like that. But I guess the question I want to ask you is, were you at all surprised by this announcement? I was a little bit, full disclosure. And secondly, what are you expecting from this event?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is that my bar for CNN and most of the mainstream media is so low that I was not surprised by this announcement. And this has been, to me, this has been sort of a move by CNN in the last, year or 2 years under the new management of, I've been saying it over and over again. You've seen me say this, that they seem to be going towards a Fox Light, audience. Like they're almost trying to get the Fox News audience by offering sort of a watered down version. Like they're not going to go as hardcore as Fox News does, but they're sort of, in my mind, destroying the existing, whatever's left, to be honest, of the existing CNN brand by pursuing this conservative, the sort of more respectable conservative audience. But at the same time, we all know that like the mainstream Republican conservative, argument is Donald Trump. So you have to go Trumpy, right? Mm-hmm. And so them choosing to host him for this town hall is kind of CNN returning to form. Like CNN, you go back to 2015, 2016, and yes, like, Donald Trump's candidacy was built on a lot of Fox News themes, but he got there by getting a lot of free exposure from CNN and MSNBC. Let's be perfectly honest about it. Like those networks were not out there, fully rebutting Donald Trump when he was talking about, banning Muslim travel to the United States. And he was talking about, grab them by this and all the other things, and all the gross, disgusting stuff, the birther stuff that he pushed for years and years about President Obama. Well, yeah, he pushed them on Fox News, but CNN and MSNBC had an open mic for him. Like one of the images that I often reference was a CNN graphic of them just, showing his open podium, waiting for Trump to arrive. Like, and I think that's so emblematic of the mainstream media's approach to Donald Trump over the last 8 years now. It's just this, they're just waiting on Trump to, let's see what he does. Let's see what crazy stuff he does. And to be, the other part of it is that the Trump act is kind of tired at this point. Like, I mean, Aaron, you followed his rallies, just as much as I did. It's the same material. There's nothing new. We're both wrestling fans. He needs to get a new gimmick. He's running with the same gimmick that he's been doing since 2015. There's nothing new. There's no new lines. So even if you want to look at it just from and we shouldn't run our politics this way, but if you want to just look at it from like just a surface dumb politics point of view, the show, the bread and circuses, it's the same old crap. So it's not even like they can say, we're covering Trump because he's doing new and exciting stuff. It's the same. He's talking about, instead of talking about crooked Hillary, he's talking about crooked Joe. It's boring, right? So that's the other part of it. So looking at all this, CNN has decided, instead of, taking a more skeptical approach to the election like they should, because they should learn their lessons, because what we had was the insurrection. We've had 2 impeachments. Trump has been indicted for crimes. Like, this is a criminal former president. He's a major grifter with his dumb NFTs that he's selling for thousands of dollars. God knows where the money is actually coming from. Like, there's just a litany of things where you think CNN would be able to, they should, at least, if you look at what their stated mission is, take a more skeptical approach to these things and not host him for a town hall where, I I can almost predict exactly what's going to happen. He'll get upset and belligerent with the moderator, and excuse me, you're being very rude. You're being very rude. And so we kind of know what's coming, and CNN is going for it anyways. And I don't think it's going to work out for them. I don't think it's going to work out for them journalistically, and I don't think in the long run it's going to work out for them in the ratings. Like, the ratings have not been great lately as they've sort of gone through their roster and gotten rid of, some of the more, I guess, voicey, opinionated in their point of view people.
Yeah.
It's not really worked out. And I don't think this is going to work out for them. And it's not good for democracy, more importantly.
No.
Like, it's not good to just sort of give him an open mic. Like, giving him an open mic is what got us a lot of problems, like, with COVID. The COVID response is like that right. Showed, I think that was one of the greatest examples, unfortunately, of why people would want a boring, normal president. Like, a boring, normal president isn't going to argue with the head of CDC during a major pandemic on TV and talk about, injecting yourself with poison.
Disinfectant.
Right. These things aren't going to happen. Like, I'm a progressive, but you look at even other Republican presidents in the past, people that I dislike, like George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan. You weren't going to see them behave like that during the pandemic. I'm sorry, you just wouldn't. Like, Bush would be dumb, but he wouldn't argue with the head of the CDC. But Trump is this figure that the media loves, and
when I think there's still, the equation that Chris Licht is running with here is that Trump equals ratings, and right. There might be something to that when you look at CNN's ratings from the Trump era to now. I mean, they've been on a precipitous decline. They are solidly in third place. So I guess I'll be curious to see that component of it. But you bring up the good point with the Trump pandemic briefings. And, if you recall, Trump was so full of BS during those briefings that I think it was MSNBC who kind of pioneered the live fact checking genre, where they'd have kind of live fact checks of stuff Trump was saying as he was saying it, or like moments after. And so I'm curious if CNN will attempt something like that, because that's obviously one of the problems with giving Trump an open mic, is that he's going to lie and lie and lie. And, will Caitlin Collins be up to the task of preventing that from happening, of fact checking him? I'm not sure.
And that's one of the issues with the press, the way that they, sort of approach these things. And Trump understands this too. He knows that a real-time fact check of him is hard to do. And when you try to do it, he plays off that. Like, he his years working within WWE wrestling, he knows that creating the friction and creating this moment is what he wants. And his audience wants him to fight. That's the other part of it. His audience wants a fight. They want the Stone Cold versus, Vince McMahon, thing to occur. They want him to yell at Caitlin Collins, because that's why they voted for him in the first place. We saw this, that recent CBS poll where, one of the number one things that they like about Republicans want their candidates to do is to own the libs. And in their worldview, no one owns the libs better than Donald Trump. And they include, fighting with CNN and the rest of the media as part of owning the libs. So this is just this helps him this is a social proof for him going forward, where he can do these things and they're going to like it and eat it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, the thing that really strikes me is that I can't remember any time in my, I think I'm coming up on like 6 years now of basically immersive cable coverage as part of my beat. And I don't think,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. But I don't think Trump has ever done any sort of exclusive event with CNN or an interview at any point. And, you can go back, like you mentioned, and I remember this was actually something that when I was at Think Progress in 2016, we were kind of on the forefront of covering this, where both MSNBC and CNN would do live shots of Trump's empty podium ahead of his speeches, instead of covering, in some instances, concurrent Hillary Clinton speeches. Like, she'd be doing a major policy speech and they would be doing a live shot of Trump's empty podium. And that became kind of like this meme over time of how bad the coverage was in 2016. But even then, it's not like CNN was having Trump on to do town halls or to do interviews. Granted, Trump at that time was calling in a lot to Morning Joe and MSNBC. So it's not like it's not like there was some sort of media blackout on non-Fox networks. But, this to me is almost like worse in some ways than some of the 2016 stuff, because they're actually doing like an exclusive event, which when you look at some of the promo spots that they're doing for this, when you look at how anchors are talking about it on air, I mean, it does definitely give the impression that it's going to be rather puffy, and that Trump is going to be treated like a front runner rather than a guy who less than 3 years ago attempted a coup.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of they give off a whiff of desperation from CNN,
Yeah.
because you want to think that, like, CNN, you're better than this. You don't need to be panting after Donald Trump, and as we said, like, not even hot and sexy Donald Trump from 2015, but old and busted Donald Trump, after losing after losing the midterms and after losing to Biden. Like, you're getting the loser Don version of him, and you're still panting after him at this point. And so it just makes CNN, in my opinion, look very, desperate and needy. And it's this thing is like, I don't even think it's gonna work. That's the other part of it. Like, I could maybe understand it if this sort of stunt, almost like, it's because I guess it is a TV show and you have to look at it as like stunt casting. And it's like having this long running TV show and you're bringing on this character, and it's like, Trump's gonna really shake up the cast on the show. The soap opera that is our lives now. Like, Trump is the evil villain from season 1, and you're bringing him
Yeah.
back for season 6 of the show, and everyone is sort of like, "But I've seen him. He's boring. He lost. He lost to Sleepy Joe. Like, you're bringing on that guy. Like, what is he going to talk about? The birth certificate again?
Yeah.
Like, it just it." And CNN going for that is just, I think it makes CNN look, to me, it makes CNN look way worse than Trump. Trump is just going
Yeah.
to be Trump. Trump always Trump. Trump is a
Yeah.
constant. And CNN
Right.
should be, a lot of progressives sometimes say, CNN, you're better than that. And I think the years have shown us, unfortunately, CNN is not better than that.
Yeah.
CNN is just as needy and panting after the Trump bump as they were in the past. But I don't think the Trump bump exists, and it won't exist for a long term. It's not a long term. It long term damages their brand. Like, CNN,
Yeah.
for better or worse, for years and years stood for, within the very low bar of cable news, stood for, okay, you have the, I think this is a bad characterization, but you have the left wing partisans on MSNBC, you have the right wing partisans on Fox. CNN, we're going to be the sort of AP New York Times of cable
Right.
news and give it to you straight. And they've strayed from that a lot, really, basically since the founding, since Ted Turner started the network. But I think they really declined in the last few years towards
Yeah.
that. And
Well,
posting Trump like this doesn't help.
yeah, but that was kind of the magic of Trump from the standpoint of these cable networks when he was president, was that you could kind of combine the straight news with the sensational, because the news
Yeah.
was pretty sensational. I mean, you go back to him firing Comey during the active investigation of his campaign, or like, the Mueller hearings, all that stuff. I mean, it kind of combined those two things in a way that really juiced ratings. And now, the news is more boring. And, I think we got a good illustration of that on the day that Trump was indicted, with the way that was covered, where it was like, they had a helicopter covering his motorcade as it went through
OJ
Palm Beach,
2.0.
down in Florida where you're at. They had a helicopter down there covering that. And then not only that, but they had like a live shot of his plane taking off. I mean, it was everything but having like a satellite, do like a live shot of his plane from space or
Right.
something. And, it really wasn't that interesting. He was traveling, to be processed. And sure, that was unprecedented. And there was some intrigue that it never happened before. So I get the interest on some level, but the way that was covered, like it was like a Mars landing or something.
Elderly man takes plane flight was literally covered like Neil Armstrong landing on the moon.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And I mean, that kind of caught me off guard because, it's just such a change from what I'm used to in the Biden era, other than on Fox, which, but even Fox, I mean, for all of the reporting about them having a rift with Trump, and they certainly have promoted DeSantis pretty heavily over the past couple of years. I think CNN's coverage of that even kind of went beyond what Fox was doing, or at least kind of matched it. So, but
I mean, and the thing is, I think Fox understands, like, Fox, I think it's overstated when people think that Fox is abandoning Trump, but at the same time, Fox understands probably more so than CNN and MSNBC that the audience wants, for better or worse, wants new meat, wants new blood. And that's why you see them pumping up people like DeSantis. You see them going after these, the other Republican candidates that are running for quote unquote, running for president.
Yeah.
Like, they understand that to feed this storyline, people want new stuff and new entertainment. And even for their micro target of the conservative audience, they also want new stuff. They understand they want new storylines. And, Fox is unfortunately great at generating nonsense out of reality. And going to the old, the Trump well, like, yes, they do that, but they don't do that nearly as much as you would think they would, considering what their audience, like their audience, yes, they love Trump, but they also want new and exciting storylines. And CNN and Fox is really not pandering to that
Yeah.
in the way that CNN is. Like it's almost like you look at. I don't want to say CNN should be emulating Fox, but just from a sort of, are you in this for ratings and spectacle, which they shouldn't be, but okay, that's what they're doing. Like, see, like Fox is not doing that. Fox is like, here's all this other crazy stuff, these other crazy, horrible, hateful, racist storylines that we're going after, and we're not necessarily constantly milking this Trump train the way that they did in 2015, 2016, and 2017.
Oh, you make a good point. It's like the 2000 version of Hulk Hogan, the heel NWO, where it's we desperately need either a babyface turn, which with Trump is never going to happen. So we need new characters, and so Fox has Vivek on there, who I don't think he really has the juice either, and I don't think that's kind of the problem. None of these other alternatives really have the juice, which is why I guess whatever juice Trump has left probably isn't worth the squeeze, but it's better than nothing, I suppose.
Right. To take the wrestling analogy, and as you and I both love it, but they really need, they need The Rock, they need Stone Cold, they need someone to they need a John Cena, they need someone that's going to take the mantle into the next generation, and instead you have Trump running the same old act, and he's not changing his act at all, and then on the flip side you have Biden's gimmick, for better or worse, is boring Biden, and people like boring.
Well, Dark
Biden.
Brandon. There's Dark Brandon.
There's Dark Brandon, right? Exactly.
It's like Finn Balor with the demon mask. It's like the alt ego.
It. Yeah. That's the other interesting thing about the Dark Brandon thing. Dark Brandon went from being this let's go Brandon chant against Biden a year and a half ago, to just recently at the correspondence dinner, he puts on the glasses and he talks about Dark Brandon, and talk about adopting the gimmick from the audience. That's one of the strangest things I've seen, actually, from a Democrat in a positive way, of actually listening to audience feedback and actually adopting it, instead of doing the usual Democratic thing that I've seen way too many times over the last 20-25 years of no, we have to be the serious and sober party. We people look to, and yes, people do look to Democrats for the serious side of things, but you can have fun with it as well. That gets people engaged. People love Dark Brandon. Like, for once, you have this sort of quote unquote dark character advocating for really popular progressive stuff that people like. Like, people like funding military veterans. People like saving Social Security. People like defending democracy. Like, the fact that Biden can go out there with the red background from the speeches last year and give this thunderous speech in defense of democracy, and Fox News portrayed him as the bad guy, and we saw this in the election results last year. Voters saw that as the good guy. People came out and defended democracy, and they were rallied in part by the president saying, "Screw you! Don't mess with our elections. Don't say that you want to steal elections and attack the Capitol." We've seen this with Biden is embracing this again with his re-election message. Like, his video launching his re-election bid literally said democracy is at stake, and he showed footage of January 6th. And this is sort of embracing the quote unquote Dark Brandon persona, is like this heel for not a heel, but like this edgy character in favor of democracy and goodness, and defending abortion rights, and attacking, and defending LGBTQ equality. Like, people want that. People want to rally to that. That's sort of, I feel like that's almost like the Democratic mirror image of this sort of nasty Trump, bigoted attacks on the world. Like, you want the guy on your side, the good guy character, doing things in a very dynamic and exciting way. Like, it doesn't have to be just, yes, it's important to have, policy undercutting everything. You don't want to go out there half-assed, but at the same time, if you can make it catchy and punchy, go for it.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, just briefly, because I do want to get to a couple other things too, but what do you think then with all of that accounts for the fact that Biden's approval ratings have been kind of stubbornly low? Is it more kind of macro factors? I mean, obviously inflation's been a big problem. It's easing a little bit, but I think, economically over the past couple of years, people have been feeling a pinch, and the president gets blamed for that. There's also one argument that Noah Berlatsky made in my newsletter today that I thought was kind of interesting, is that, there might be kind of a conflation of, some of the bad stuff that's happening, even in Florida, where you're at, on the state level with Republican legislatures, attacking people's rights, that Biden takes some blame for that, whether he should or not. That's just kind of how people think about politics. But I mean, what do you think? Because, I think back on January 2021, that was a pretty dark time. I think like 80,000 people that month in the United States died from COVID. The unemployment was like 6%. And so when you kind of do the old Reagan thing of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I mean, I think it's pretty undeniable that the vast majority of Americans are, but for whatever reason, that doesn't really seem to be breaking through, at least in a way that goes beyond kind of the comparison with the Trumps and the DeSantises, who are inherently pretty unpopular beyond the Republican base. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, because, you look at some of these graphics that Fox likes to display where they're comparing, even going back to Jimmy Carter. And at this point in Biden's presidency, his approval is, a notch below any of these other modern era presidents. And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts what accounts for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough nut to crack. I think part of it is, we sort of have to accept the new normal that very few presidents are going to be popular in the way that we've traditionally thought about it in the past, with sustained popularity. Like I think that the last president like that was maybe Bill Clinton, because if you look at like the last few presidents, they all sort of take a pretty steady decline over their first term. If they serve 2 terms, if the first term's in office, like people forget it now, but I mean, his numbers weren't as bad as Biden's, but Obama's numbers were not great in 2012. And, George W. Bush, famously, if you look at his chart, like 9/11, it shot straight up. And then from 9/11 to the 2004 election, like it's a direct slope going down. So I almost feel like we have to reorient ourselves around like, what is a popular president in the 21st century compared to what it was in the 20th century? In the 20th century, I think we had a lot less just straight up partisanship. There are a lot of people right now that, if you polled them and asked them, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? A lot of people would say, oh yeah, absolutely, definitely. And then they say, but who are you going to vote for? And they'll say, not Joe Biden. And because it's just a matter of, they've got a team. And even if their situation is better off, they're not going to give credit to the other team for that. And I think, it goes both ways. Like you could have improvement under a Republican president, and I think a lot of Democrats wouldn't give the other party, enough credit for them to get over 50%. And we saw that with Trump. Trump never got above, in the aggregate, over 50% for his entire presidency. At the very least, Biden started off that way. Like Biden and Obama both started off with this sort of optimistic over 50% presidency. Whereas like, Trump never had that. He never had that grace period because he came in under a cloud of suspicion in a way that not even George W. Bush, who also, first won the presidency by only through the Electoral College and losing the popular vote. Even Bush had that sort of grace period back in 2001. But Trump never had it. Biden had it for a little bit, but it's petered out over time. And I feel like this almost like the new normal now of it's a cliche, and a lot of things, it's not 50-50 when it comes to issues, but I think when it comes to parties and personalities, there is a real strong 50-50 divide among these things.
Yeah, and that's kind of an amazing thing with our politics, is that when you look at it from an issue standpoint, Republicans are on the wrong side of just about every issue. I mean, maybe there's some economic ones that you could tease out. I guess low taxes obviously is broadly pretty popular. You have to kind of unpack what you mean by low taxes. But they end up trying to win on kind of these edge culture war things, and maybe that's even becoming a little more fraught now with the Dobbs decision and reproductive rights. It's one thing to rhetorically be anti-abortion, but when the rubber kind of meets the road and people are getting the rights taken away, I think we're seeing problem. Yeah, right. So, but it is that's an amazing dynamic in American politics where you would think politics is at least in large part about issues, and on issues, Republicans seem to be on the unpopular side of just about all of them. And yet, we're looking at the House of Representatives right now, and we have this debt ceiling hostage situation because Republicans have a majority there. And granted, the midterms, when you put it in a historical context with the president's party, first term president, Democrats overperformed. But the fact of the matter is still that Republicans won the House, and that leads to a lot of problems that we're living through right now. But I did want to pivot to your latest Oliver Willis Explains piece that you did, because I posted a little excerpt from it on Twitter last night that really blew up. I mean, it has thousands of retweets, and for good reason, because the lead to your piece is really compelling. So I'm just going to read a couple sentences here. The headline of the piece is "The Media Hid Donald Trump's Physical Attack on a Reporter for 37 Days." So great headline right away, but here's the lead of the piece. Oliver writes, "Imagine this following scenario. President Biden is upset after a speaking event and a reporter asks him a question. Perturbed by the question, Biden grabs a reporter's phone that they're recording on and throws it aside. Now imagine that such an event occurred in full view of multiple reporters, and that instead of breaking into the 24-hour news cycle to report it, the journalist sat on the story for 37 days. This actually happened, but it didn't happen with Joe Biden. It happened with Donald Trump. The decision to suppress this event says a lot about the mainstream media, and it isn't anything good, end quote. And so you go on to talk about how this embodies the symbiotic relationship that reporters have with Trump, and just want you to unpack that a little bit. In what sense do you think that this, represents kind of the toxic relationship going on there?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of related to what we talked about with CNN, but and I don't have a conspiratorial point of view on this. That's the part that I want to make really clear. Like I don't
actually let me interject too, because I should take a step back and actually explain for people who maybe are not familiar with the story what happened here. Just very briefly, Von Hilliard, who is an NBC reporter, was on Trump's plane. This was after a speech that Trump gave. There were a number of reporters on the plane. Hilliard was trying to ask Trump about his legal problems, basically, and Trump got angry. Basically demanded that he get away from him, that Hilliard get away from him, and at a certain point grabbed his phones and kind of tossed them. There's an audio recording of this. I haven't actually heard the recording. I don't think it's out there, but it's been referenced in news reporting. But this event, as the headline kind of suggests, happened, there are 37 days that elapsed between when it happened and when news of this was broken. So anyway, that gets you up to speed.
Right. Yeah. And so the question is like, why has this story been, I mean, I hate to say, but why has it been suppressed? Like, why was it not an immediate breaking news story? Like, to me, this is major news for a candidate to do this sort of thing. And that's why I sort of characterized it as, how would it be covered if Biden did it? But, to be perfectly honest, like, how would it have been covered if Mitt Romney did it or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or, John McCain? Like, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think that this story would have stood around for so long under those people. But the thing with Trump and the way that the press operates is that I feel like the press has this habit of sanding off the edges around Donald Trump. And they do this for him different than they've done for any other candidate that I've ever seen in the time that I've been writing about politics. Like, just to be perfectly blunt, like he gets the kid glove treatment in a way that nobody else seems to get. And it's strange for such an extreme, absurd, out there character. And you have to look at like what is the relationship between this treatment of Trump and what it means for a lot of the reporters that follow him. Like a lot of reporters have built their careers both within media organizations and for personal financial gain on Donald Trump and having quote unquote scoops about Donald Trump. A lot of these reporters, they're on the Trump beat. You have people like Maggie Haberman, who's basically built herself at the New York Times into, one of the leading political reporters of our generation based on her inside sources, about Donald Trump and breathless reporting about, the infighting and the drama and the different characters involved in both Trump's campaigns and in the White House. And you have the same sort of thing where, you have Jonathan Karl, a reporter at ABC News. At this point, I think he's written 3 different books about Donald Trump. And so you have to look at like, there is a financial incentive for a lot of these people, financial and personal prestige within the industry of keeping Trump around and of sanding off these edges and of keeping these stories, until you can write them up in a book for, and I don't know that there's necessarily doing that with this incident, but it fills a pattern, in my opinion, of keeping these things on the down low. And then, 6 months from now, a book will come out and, this amazing, episode happens and gee, check it out. You can only find out the details about it in my book. I mean, this incident, specific incident, was witnessed by multiple reporters from multiple media organizations. You had people from like the Associated Press, apparently, Daily Mail, and the NBC reporter who was the main focus of it. And yet none of them, that's the part that's really amazing to me, none of them reported on this until the Vanity Fair piece was the first story about it. And there's actual, apparently, audio corroboration. And the Washington Post, I think just yesterday, said they heard the audio, which is still not come out yet. That's sort of amazing. Like, this is the media guy, right? Like, Trump is the media guy. We have endless clips of him, hundreds and thousands of clips of audio and video of him doing God knows what for, not even just as president, but for the last 40 years of American life. Yeah. And yet somehow this audio of him yelling at a reporter, which is something that he's done, again, multiple times, but this one hasn't come out yet. Like, it all strikes me as very strange. And it strikes me as, again, not that I think that these reporters are like closet Republicans and that they want conservative, ideals to succeed, but at the same time, there is an incentive built into the system of career advancement for them. They become White House correspondents. They become senior reporters for these organizations, or personal. They get book deals, and these book deals are very lucrative. Like sometimes people underplay, like how much are they getting paid for these book deals? Well, these book deals are for six figures for a lot of these people. Like these book deals, they're in like there may not be John Grisham, Barack Obama territory, but they're really up there. Like they're really nice deals to have. And so you have to examine like how do they behave towards him in light of the fact that there is a very real incentive for them to protect him and to coddle him over the last few years.
And I do want to give Hilliard a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because this could easily be a situation where possibly he wanted to write something about it and editors weren't into it,
sure,
or
we don't know.
that and he hasn't commented when he's been asked in recent days since this Vanity Fair report detailing this incident came out. So I don't want to totally throw him under the bus. We don't know the full dynamics there. NBC has kind of had a fraught relationship over the years with Trump, who obviously, The Apprentice was on NBC. So I don't know the full details there, but I think it's not only that. It'd be one thing if Trump had merely yelled at him. I mean, that would be, I guess, kind of bad, but that's pretty on brand. Right. But, there's kind of the added, this is, I guess, the world we live in now, where if you grab someone's phone, there is, it's kind of destruction of property, or, assault, I guess, in a way.
It's an escalation.
It's an escalation.
It's an escalation. Yeah. And it's an unusual behavior within the world of politics and just celebrity in general. Like, we've seen this you see the paparazzi all the time, right? Like, I mean, people would probably cheer for a lot of the paparazzi, if Kim Kardashian grabbed some guy's camera when he was getting a sort of invasive moment, covering her. People would probably rally to her, but it would still be news. And that paparazzo who took the video of Kim grabbing his camera, we'd see it on TMZ within minutes, right?
Well, and this is different than that, because these reporters were invited on the plane. I mean, it's not like they were accosting him when he was out at dinner or something. I mean, the whole point was to have these reporters on the plane to cover the event, to ask him questions. And so, and it was by all accounts, it was a legitimate line of questioning, asking about the,
Absolutely.
I think this incident occurred just before his indictment, but Hilliard was basically asking him about the investigation and his thoughts on it. So, it's not like he was asking him some, sordid family scandal or something like that. It was just, although I guess the whole Stormy Daniels thing kind of is a sordid family scandal.
Right, but it's fair game. I mean, he is the leading Republican presidential candidate. He's the former president of the United States. In all likelihood, he's going to be the Republican nominee for president. Like, ask Joe Biden about getting asked, tough questions. That's part of the job. Like, suck it up, right? Like, that's, these are not, as you said, these were not crazy, out of bound, left-wing conspiracy theories. This was asking about an active, ongoing investigation from the district attorney into Trump's finances. Like, this is a real thing. Like, he's had people around him, already be sentenced to prison related to this specific charge. Like, it's a perfectly legit question. And also, strangely enough, let's give Trump some leeway here. If Trump wanted to shut down the line of questioning or say that's out of bounds, that's fine too. Like, he can do that. That's his prerogative. It's the point where he's grabbing this phone and there's audio of it and it didn't come out for 37 days. That's, to me, is the pivot point in this whole thing.
Sure. Two parting questions and we got to get you out of here, but you're down in Florida, boots on the ground in DeSantis land down there.
Yeah.
Do you think, very briefly, do you think DeSantis is done? Does he have a chance of winning the nomination?
I mean, I almost don't want to join the pack of people. Like, I have this natural instinct of being afraid when everybody agrees going in one direction. And it sort of stems from my experience during the Iraq War, but he kind of looks toasty right now. He doesn't have the juice to go up against Trump. He's really run away from fighting Trump, and then he's fighting Mickey Mouse at the same time. So he looks terrible and weak. So, I'm not saying don't stick a complete fork in him yet, but if I were going to run for the Republican nomination, I'd much rather be Trump than DeSantis anytime soon.
Okay, and then extending from that, how worried should liberals be about Trump winning next year?
They should be extremely worried. Like, don't write him off. Don't assume just because Biden kicked his ass that he's not gonna, he can't win. Don't make the mistake that was made in 2016 of assuming that there's no way this can happen. Go into the entire election assuming that he can win, but go in with confidence and knowing that The issues are on the Democrat side. And then if they're really strong in presenting a case to people on these issues, like protecting the right to an abortion, protecting transgender kids, protecting Social Security, if they take an advanced position on these and don't go into the usual Democratic, defensive crouch, he can be beaten. And we know that Trump can be beaten. So he's not invincible by any matter. Like Hillary Clinton beat him in the popular vote. Joe Biden beat him in the popular vote electoral college. He lost the midterms. He's got the stink of loser on him, but just don't think that he can't win again.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Oliver. Really appreciate your time. Great stuff. We went a little bit longer than I expected, but that's all because it's a joy to hear you talk about politics. So
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
That does it for today's episode of the Aaron Rupar Show. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow me on YouTube to watch the footage of the show each week. You can find me there at the Aaron Rupar Show. New episodes drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check out your feeds each week for a new installment of the show, and thanks for listening.